what your motivation.
Let's talk about it. Okay, so first of all, there's an article that I will send to anyone who signs up on the list by Robin Hannell. It's called Protecting the Environment and a Participatory Economy. I highly recommend it. Probably, if you're leaning in the direction of thinking that self-sufficiency is the most environmentally sustainable form for, like, small, like, return to, like, New England town hall meeting, localized production. Remember where you bioregional. I'm from New England. So I live in New York now, but I'm from southeastern Connecticut. So, and a lot of my friends advocate these views. I don't mean to be. Hope I haven't come off as mean or anything like that. Not my intention. Just provocative. And in terms of, okay, so yeah, we haven't really talked about the environment and what the impact of this would be. We talked a little bit about how markets destroy the environment, right? Markets produce externalities. And there's more than environmental externalities, but that's the clear example, right? It only takes into account you and me. But we have the value of self-management, which means that people should have a say in the decisions that affect them proportionate to the degree that they are affected, right? Mm-hmm. So an example being issues of, like, pollution control or infrastructure building is ultimately, it's still determined by communities. Like, so if you're concerned about, like, this issue of local control, it's not like some, like, centralized state bureaucracy is determining it, but if people decide that they do want a bridge, here, building there, they're going to decide that and they're going to do that. And in terms of limits placed upon it, that's where, like, an economy-wide council is necessary to make certain decisions regarding carbon emissions, regarding environmental, and I actually totally disagree. There's a lot of environmental safeguards here, and I recommend George Monbiot's book Heat, in which he proposes something far less than all of this, which he believes is the absolute, bare minimum of what's necessary to sort of get us off the path in terms of global warming, not in terms of establishing environmentally sustainable society. But the planning, I'd say, is the main way. The market doesn't take into account of the environmental impact of production. Instead, we can utilize the resources of scientists and past information that we have about production levels and its impact on the environment, and we can assess and say, look, for these types of goods, with these types of effects, we have to just cap it for society. There can be only certain levels of production. Yes.
Real quick. We're going to talk about how we're going to get from here to there, because we're down to 10 minutes.
Okay.
That's what we...
Well, that's what you'll tell me, right? So,
I think that's what we wanted to get.
How do we get there?
Strategy.
Keep it a secret.
Yeah, right. I don't know. Okay, so there's a couple of things. One is, I'm not saying, like, I've been to talks where sometimes people present, like, their vision of what the world should look like. As I said earlier, like, I will disagree with you if you think that this is some, like, utopian idea that popped out of my head. Actually was in the heads of millions of working people around the world in some varied form for a very long time, and that it's been crushed, beaten back, and it's time for it to return. And if you want practical examples, one of the best and most interesting, though by no means perfect, is the workers' movement in Spain. In the years preceding 1936, and in particular in the first and second year of the Spanish Civil War, changes along these lines were implemented on vast scales in Catalonia, and especially in Barcelona among industrial workers as well as agricultural workers. Interesting counterpoint to the so-called socialism of the Soviet Union. So that's one point, but that's an obscure, perhaps historical example. How would we get here? More concrete historical example that I mentioned, I forget if this talk or the last one, is the grassroots councils of workers and consumers. Like I said, anytime working people have risen up, they've formed these types of councils. First, to wrest certain gains, and it's sometimes in defiance of their existing vehicles. There are numerous examples of workers actually defying their unions, forming independent forms of organization. Sometimes they were called councils, sometimes they were called assemblies, and voting to take a strike, voting to occupy a factory, voting to take over production and manage it for themselves. Of course, this is only possible to manage production cooperatively under this system if multiple industries are organized. So for example, what you had in Spain was you had such a high level of organization and workers that provided themselves with a high level of education that when they took over the factories, the trucking workers, the agricultural workers, workers in this plant, workers in this, this sector and that sector were able to coordinate and continue production going and to provide the inputs needed and to essentially take over the management of the economy away from the capitalists. And one of their powerful things working in their favor was their numbers. So that's one thing, workers' councils. And how do we get there? Well, unfortunately, the answer isn't so great. It's not go form a workers' council. It's we need to be doing union organizing. We need to be involved in workers' centers. And we need to be establishing more forums like this to further cultivate these ideas and determine how we would practically get there. Again, that wasn't the objective of today's conversation, but here's an example. All of us constitute ourselves as the movement for a participatory economy. This isn't seen as antagonistic to other objectives, but we form, a political group that advocates this program, right, in the long term. What do we do in the short term? If we're in unions, we agitate within our unions to democratize them, to begin to move in a more class struggle direction, right? Or we organize unions in our workplace so that we get involved in workers. This is one example, and I'm using a very worker-centric example. I don't mean to be economist or reductionist about it. It's just kind of where my head's at this moment. I could go another path another time, but we don't have time. So in terms of this, if we had sort of a space where we were advocating these things, perhaps through, media, podcasts, magazines, newspaper, website, etc., we're organizing bigger conferences. We're soliciting donations. We're advocating these general ideas of a participatory economic system in America, right? But all of us are also actively engaged in the type of reform work that's so valuable in improving people's lives. But sort of where we come in, if we are economic revolutionaries and hopefully social revolutionaries wanting to transform our whole society, what we do is we inject into these reform struggles and cultivate and win people over to a bigger program, a broader perspective, and we should have a different way of struggling for certain reforms. Here's an example. In New York, there's a campaign for a living wage right now. I think it's $11.50 an hour plus benefits for any worker who works at a workplace that receives a public subsidy. Sounds great. That would be great to have. It would affect me, it would affect a lot of other people. But what would we want to push for? Would we want to push for something more? Possibly. I mean, we might assess that it's better to just go with this and maybe advocate saying there's more struggles around the corner. But one other option is, if we were strong enough, is advocating a universal annual income adjusted for inflation for all working people, as an example, right? As one reform that's in a much more radical direction. Why? It directly cuts into profit. It's providing for people simply because they are humans, etc. Or in general, it's the way that we fight for reform struggles. Do reform struggles end with simply, you got $11.50 raised in benefits, that's it, the people who struggle for it dissipate, etc. Or do we come out of it stronger with more infrastructure in which the resources we cultivated we determine would be good to put towards workers' cooperatives, for example, and developing sort of examples, prefigurations of certain forms of this, directing resources towards cultivating cooperative workplaces that embody certain of these features. Okay, so that's some of it. We can just getting my it's been from one talk to the other, so I'm just exhausting myself a little bit. But okay, so in terms of strategy, just to recap, we need to form vehicles of struggles that can win reforms. And in the process of winning these reforms, we can sort of determine the success of those struggles, not only by whether we won the reform. In fact, it could be a success if we lost it, and if we come out of it with more support, people have a deeper understanding of the nature of their opponents and the nature of the system that they're up against. If they come out of it with more supporters, more money, more infrastructure, more organization, and more experience to draw upon, and are ready for a next battle, that's what we should be encouraging. So the problem is, within sort of the framework of unions or worker centers or cooperatives, or the general vehicles of struggle that bring a lot of people together, not everyone should have to share this perspective to be a part of that, right? So instead, there needs to be the parallel organization. It used to be called a party. You could call it a group, an organization, a collective. It doesn't matter. The point being, we need to be capable of simultaneously advocating a vision like this and applying it practically, and grinding my teeth because I feel like this is a very inadequate summation.
I've come to the conclusion that after 45 years of fight on these kinds of things, that at this point what we need to do is have the vision and everything else is subsidiary and it's a byproduct. The vision is we have to end the empire. And I'm taking this really serious. I mean, I joke about, oh, let's take a vote. All in favor say aye. But if we take that and unify people across the board, gradually until everybody, like in Egypt right now, they've got it. This regime has to go. Well, that's what we have to come to the same damn conclusion. And then along the way, there can be wins, stopping the wars. Okay, that's one. Environmental, reverse the environmental degradation. That's two. We could think of a whole string of things that are byproducts of the main theme, ending this damn empire.
Yeah, but John, how far are they going to take it in Egypt?
Well, we'll see.
That's the thing.
We'll see. We don't know.
It seems to me that you may be dodging some of the more difficult questions. I don't have a problem seeing how workers' councils could work for things like increasing wages or things that are beneficial to the workers.
Yeah.
But a workers' council movement is not about, in a weapons producing factory, say, well, we ought to close our factory down because weapons aren't good. On environmental balance things, I could see a real problem coming up of conflict arising for things saying, this isn't an environmentally sound industry we're in, and we should close the whole fucking industry down. And the idea that workers' councils are going to come to that conclusion seems to me to be a little bit kind of naive.
Well, I think it's a little ahistorical to think that workers in weapons manufacturing industries, and historically workers in weapons manufacturing industries have gone on strike against wars, have refused to produce armaments, but it's a question of what we put into it to provide education, inspiration, and help push people further. And furthermore, why couldn't workers, or soldiers for that matter, go on strike and refuse to fight and say, we want to be put towards a socially useful function. We want the machinery in this factory to stop producing bombs. We want it to be producing something useful for people, components for the healthcare industry, etc. It's not going to be easy. This is going to be really difficult to do. And perhaps I'm naive for thinking that people are capable of, one, operating in this system, and two, obtaining it. But I don't think that tomorrow there's going to be a workers' council formed. I don't think 3-4 years from now it's going to be a workers' council formed in the U.S. necessarily, or a workers' council movement. But there already are in countries around the world at different historical time periods, and people have made significant gains through that. And I don't think it's a key. It's like one part of it, because that is an interesting example. That's where the state comes in, for example, where government comes in, where certain demands need to be made upon the government, where the state needs to be struggled against.
The thing that I think
I hate to break in, but I hope we can wrap up because we got sort of a where do we go from here session downstairs. Okay.
I just wanted to build on John's point. Is that